This is Madeline Cum from Let Me Be Forward. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Dr. Mariah White, host of Your Life Matters, here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Your Life Matters, where we talk about dreaming big and dreaming bold to reach your wildest dreams in both your health and your happiness. A new show comes out every single Tuesday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Your Life Matters. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy, and you probably are too. I'm Lindsay, and today I am here miraculously still with Emily because she has not given birth yet, and Elizabeth, and we're here to talk nerdy to you. So this week, Elizabeth and I had been talking about science fiction and how we haven't really talked about science fiction like the old science fiction. And we got to thinking about how there's certain elements of science fiction in television and movies and even books that are always there, or that have to be there in order for it to be good science fiction. So, and you know, it's funny too, because nowadays when you go to like a liberal arts college, you can even find the cool like English class that is about like science fiction and fantasy. And of course, it's always the class that I want to take, but it never works for my degree problems. But I thought it would be really cool, and so did everyone else, of course. I'm not making them do this, but we thought it would be really cool to talk about what we think has to be in a sci-fi element in order for it to be good. So that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, but before we get into that, I wanted to talk about my periodically scientific segments, which it kind of relates to our sci-fi because it's new developments in technology, and it's something that, well, okay, it relates to batteries, and what's really happening here is we're trying to figure out a better way to store energy for faster charging and discharging and higher safety, so that because right now a lot of our smartphones and electric bicycles and cars and all that sort of stuff use lithium ion battery technology, but I'm going to completely butcher the name here because I don't speak French at all. Université Catholique Louvain, I don't know, it's a French university, I'm assuming in a city called Louvain. Anyways, they have been researching a new material called LTPS. I'm assuming it's something in French, and they made an acronym so that English-speaking people or non-French-speaking people can say it easily. But they discovered this high-performance material that can speed up the charge and discharge of batteries. And it's actually safer than the lithium-ion batteries because the ones that we currently have, and we actually had issues with these batteries in, what was it, the Galaxy 7s, where they would explode on airplanes and stuff, or start a fire in your pocket because of the pressure change, because it's a liquid-based battery to store the energy. But this one is a solid-state battery. And so the technology has figured out how to store information on a solid-state drive. You know, most modern computers have a solid-state hard drive. And so now they're looking at the idea of having solid-state batteries so that we don't have to mess with these flammable liquids floating around. But the issue that they came into is, since the lithium-ion batteries has a liquid in it, the energy can move around inside really easily because it's fluid, it's liquid, and so it's really easy for it to move around. But they discovered a way to make the crystal structure of this lithium compound specifically so that it actually travels really, really quickly between the atoms. So the crystalline structure of this lithium compound is what makes it unique, because it's not necessarily something that's easy to come by, but it's something that they figured out how to do. And so what they need to do now is to study and improve the material so that it's easier to manufacture and make it more commercializable, enable its future commercialization. That's what it says in the article. And this is from ScienceDaily.com. So if you wanted to look it up, it's called A New Material for the Battery of the Future. So they figured out, it's the name of the compound is the chemical formula for it. It's made with lithium, titanium, what is that? Phosphorus and sulfur? It's LiTi2PS43 or LTPS. So that is what it's called. And it's, what does it say? The researchers observed the highest lithium diffusion coefficient, which is the direct measure of lithium mobility ever measured in a solid before. So it's really fast. And they're thinking that it'd be ideal to use these in cell phones and larger batteries so that we can store renewable sources of energy like solar and wind energy in a higher capacity and a higher performance battery, because a lot of the renewable energy sources, they don't collect energy consistently throughout the day. It's based on is it windy right now or is it sunny right now? And so they're trying to find a way to store that energy safely, efficiently, and have a lot of it be able to be stored there. And they're thinking that this might be one of the best options right now. So if they can get that figured out, that'd be really, really cool.
Yeah.
Also this research is being done in collaboration with Toyota. So I'm thinking some cars are going to have some LTPS in it in the future once they figure out how to commercialize this material. So, yeah.
Cool. And by the way, your mom pregnant brain has not completely defunct yet. S is for sulfur.
S is for sulfur. Thank you. Okay. Yes. Sulfur, not what did I say?
No, you said sulfur, you're good.
Oh, good. Okay. No, I was thinking P. What was P for?
Oh, probably phosphorus.
I said phosphorus. Was I right?
I'll have to look it up. But let's start talking about science fiction.
Yeah, let's do that.
I do think it's interesting that science fiction is defined as a genre of fiction in which the stories often tell about science and technology of the future. So most of them always have those kind of elements, and it's usually the science fiction always has a relationship with the principles of science, even if they're loosely based. They're still supposed to be partially true. So that's the whole idea is partially true science, partially fictitious laws or theories of science. But isn't all science theory because you're supposed to be continually proving it or something?
Well, that's the neat thing about when you're writing something that's science fiction, because you're looking at what is the now, and you kind of look at what is being developed and look to the future and say, hey, what could this be?
Right.
Yeah. I remember one of our previous episodes we did is science fiction technology, with technology that was purely brought up as speculation in fiction and then later materialized in the real world in one way or another. So it takes a great degree of creativity and, logical linear thinking and kind of the marriage of the science and the art in order to write in the science fiction genre.
Yeah, and I remember listening to a podcast by my brother-in-law. His podcast is How to Write Good, about writing. And he did an episode or two, I think, on the problem of science fiction. Because as a genre, it is so broad. And it basically includes any and every what-if scenario you can possibly think of outside of what is actually fact. So,
and that's kind of what we're talking about today. So.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so, so in figuring out like what makes a good sci-fi, like we have to figure out, well, what is our favorite sci-fis, or what are the ones that have been successful, or maybe there's some that um, that people have missed out on but should have found out about because they have certain elements that make them really, really, really good, but they maybe
So
like
what
Firefly.
so what has endured, in other words, the
Right.
test of time?
Yes.
Because there has
Exactly.
been a lot of sci-fi shows and movies out there,
Yes.
but really only a fraction of them are still like kind of in our conscious media consumption. And I mean, obviously there's some bigger ones. There are a little bit of smaller ones that kind of, are thrown out there. But in relation to everything that has been put out there, it's really just a fraction of the total sci-fi that's available.
So I have not seen anywhere close to every episode of this sci-fi, but the one that always sticks out for me that is like hardcore, like this is what defines what sci-fi is for a lot of people, is Star Trek. Starting with the original series and then moving on to, the Next Generation, just, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and all of that. Like as far as sci-fi goes, I feel like Star Trek has kind of paved the way, along with Doctor Who in certain ways too.
Yeah,
and those two kind of in tandem, because they've been like Star Trek has been like at the American side of things. Doctor Who's been on the British side of things. So,
well, I think, one of the biggest things that kind of make it stick out are not just the series themselves, but the characters. Yeah. Because I think, like, a lot of people can still, like, even if they casually watch a series or two, they can still identify characters that they like. And, this is obviously, like, true for any show, movie, book, whatever. But, obviously you need strong, diverse characters that people can identify with and that they can care about. Because even if you have a good story to tell, if people aren't interested in the people who are living out that story and pushing that story forward, then, you're sunk as a concept.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the big things, I think, is creating characters that people can like and people can identify with. So, creating a whole crew in Star Trek, and for, obviously each one, you get a different crew each time, and, getting them to the point, developing them and getting them to the point where people can run with them and say, yeah, I like this, so I want to keep watching this for these characters.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I even think that's part of why Firefly has such a following, even though it was such a short-lived series. There was such depth, even just implied depth, for all of the characters. Like, everybody had a backstory that we at least knew a tiny bit about, and so we were able to relate to them on a certain level, and they all had their relationships with the other characters too. And even though there were only 14 episodes and then the movie, like we got to know them really well.
Well, and then you have a passion for those characters too. Like,
yeah,
I think that's important for people who might not necessarily be interested in sci-fi. You have to have interesting and drawing characters to begin with, because if you don't, then those people won't even be interested at all.
Right.
I feel like a lot of times there's almost like a bad rap when it comes to watching something that's science fiction. Even my brother recently told me, "Oh, you need to watch this show. It's streaming on Prime." And I know the name of the show that he wants me to watch, and only because I asked him again. But he knows that I really liked Battlestar Galactica. And when I started watching Battlestar Galactica, I was not interested in the science fiction aspect of it. I was more interested in the characters, and I was really behind the romance story between a couple characters. And since then, even watching that first season, I got really into the mechanics of the different characters and the ships and what was this part. And, you can really geek out on things like that. You can find a map of what the ship looked like. You can find timelines of different events that had happened. and different battles, maps of the galaxies, all kinds of cool stuff. But you really need to be able to draw in someone like me who's watching it with their boyfriend to want to watch it some more. I know that makes me sound like a little like prissy female. I'm not, I swear, but it's something that really took me in from the start, and I feel like that's what happened with Doctor Who, and I feel like that's kind of what happened obviously with Firefly as well. I mean, we could talk forever about how I was really just hoping that Wash and something amazing was going to happen with whatever was going on. Maybe Inara and Mel were finally going to stop trying to kill each other or something. But I felt like that was always really important to me, to make sure that the characters were drawing you in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So I'm looking at a few different articles about like what you'll always find in a sci-fi show. And like number one is robots. And I'm trying to think, okay, robots in Doctor Who would be the Cybermen.
Oh, yes.
Were there robots in Battlestar Galactica? They were the Cylons. Star Trek, androids, cyborgs.
Oh, there's Data.
There's in there. There's Data, yeah.
Right.
He was a robot. He was an android, but that's
like a subsection of robots.
Yeah, exactly.
What
it's a
about
variation of a robot.
Stargate?
Stargate didn't really have robots.
See?
They have
Firefly?
Technology and devices. Firefly, I don't think, had many robots, if any at all, either. Huh. It was very.
But then again, we didn't get very many episodes, so who knows?
That's true.
There could be.
Well, and Firefly was a very low tech sci-fi to begin with. They had a spaceship, but it was very rudimentary, and every place that they went was very normal, except for when they went to Ariel for the hospital.
Right. So then the debate ends up being, is it sci-fi or is it fantasy?
Yeah, and that's a big debate that's waged with Star Wars in particular, because, it's like, it's not sci-fi, it's space fantasy or whatever. And I'm
because it's also not based in the future. It's based
it's technically based in the past, but with how time works and how space travel works, it's our past, but it's kind of their present or future or something. Yeah. So right, I mean, that's kind of a little bit nebulous, I think. I don't know. I don't really have a personal stake in it.
Yeah, neither do I. It's just an interesting, bone to pick between.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what's funny too is okay, so the next one that is said it has to be in there would be the classic debate of the laws that would govern robots. So that's Isaac Asimov's
not
main
harming
conundrum.
Men. Yeah, not harming humans and stuff like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because
if one of those laws is broken, then for lack of a better, hell breaks loose. I mean,
right. Yeah. Then we have chaos.
And a lot of his work was literally trying to knock down those 3 laws that were important to robot functioning. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was, I mean, it's cool when you get into the older stuff, the real old stuff, because sci-fi, where it started and where it's gone, and the debate about whether it's fantasy or not. Okay, so next one, the modern twist, Transformers, Blade Runner. What's that one show? Futuristic, but
oh yeah.
So it's set in the near future.
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting because the Transformers '86 movie was set in 2005.
Oh, boy.
So, yeah, apparently by 2005, we were supposed to have lots of spaceships and space travel, and we were supposed to have Transformers here, so...
Oh, goodness.
We're overdue here.
Yeah, man, come on, let's get this figured out. Wow.
It's funny when you think about it, there's always like a idea of making humans or like manufacturing humans. Because in Battlestar Galactica, the Cylons were like replicants, like they were in Blade Runner. Like the concept is very similar.
I just remembered the word replicant reminded me. In Stargate, there is a type of robot called a replicator. Now, it's not like a replicator in Star Trek.
Okay.
A replicator is basically a tiny robot that can build itself into anything that it basically like eats raw materials like metal and wood and stuff, and it takes the raw materials and turns it into more replicators and then builds whatever the heck it wants to out of itself. So that became a very challenging enemy for the teams of the Stargate program for a long time.
So it's basically 3D printing itself.
Yeah, basically. It's taking the raw material, turning it into more replicators so that it can use the replicators to make things. And it's built into the programming of them to find the strongest materials and use the most advanced technology. So that's the one robot instance that I can think of. Otherwise, it was mostly like devices and things that you can use as a tool, not necessarily an artificial intelligence robot kind of thing.
Well, and like we've talked about how a lot of them have time travel, and I guess the idea of science fiction with time travel would be using the science behind those concepts in order to explain it or to govern it, like with like Back to the Future.
Like how do we avoid the grandfather paradox and all this?
Right. So, Elizabeth, I know there were certain shows you wanted to talk about and make sure that we touch on those. Mm-hmm. What were they?
Well, I really like in talking about because I had like a couple of different like things that I think makes a good sci-fi show, and like obviously a couple of them can apply to shows in general because obviously. As far as characters go, I mean, that can be for any show, movie, book, what have you. Obviously, that's
anything with a story that has characters.
Obviously, that's a good bullet point to have, is that you want to have good characters. Another one, especially for TV shows, is to have pretty balanced storytelling. There's kind of a whole concept of Monster of the Week shows, sometimes the monster is like literal, sometimes it's figurative, but it's basically like kind of formulaic in that the characters deal with a certain problem and resolve it, and then the next week they tackle another problem and resolve it. So kind of like, I guess in like in the original Star Trek, their whole mission was, they were going and exploring the universe, and so like pretty much every episode was they would end up at some planet or installation and they would discover a problem or something was going on and they would handle it in some way. And it's actually interesting to me because, a good show will eventually move on from that Monster of the Week storytelling. It is, I think, good because it helps, kind of build up your world and introduce people to the characters and do a little bit of character development. But eventually, good shows will kind of move on and tackle bigger, wider arcs. But what is interesting to me is that the original Star Trek doesn't really move on from that very much. Like, pretty much all the episodes are just the formulaic Monster of the Week type of episodes. So the fact that the original Star Trek has just stuck for so long, I think, is more of a testament to the characters and the writing of the show rather than the balanced storytelling that I think is important for, like all of the other shows that aren't the original Star Trek.
Yeah, which is actually pretty cool because, like, then the other Star Trek shows can kind of echo back to the previous to the original series, and say like, hey, remember when we faced this monster of the week? Or and then they can work off of that and like build a deeper story using those previous episodes, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and so like in Next Generation, like obviously they started out that way, but then they started tackling bigger storylines that kind of, encompassed multiple episodes and had longer arcs, and it, grew and developed as a series.
Yeah, and that's kind of, well, in a way, Stargate does that too. They have the big bad guy for most of the first few seasons. Then they move on to another big bad guy. But in Stargate, the way that they approach the like Monster of the Week thing is like, so their first the first big bad guy is a race of aliens called the Goa'uld, or the Goa'uld. And they're basically there's symbiotes that possess the body of another life form and basically control the mind of that being. And so they hijack people's bodies and make them act how they want to. And so in Stargate, the monster of the week, so to say, is which the Goa'uld are impersonating Egyptian gods and goddesses, and so it's kind of like, well, which god or goddess is the one that is the big bad this week?
Yeah.
Or like, which piece of Goa'uld technology are we trying to figure out, or their languages, or are there other alien races that they don't know about? Like, who built these Stargates to begin with? And it wasn't the Goa'uld. The Goa'uld claimed to have done that, but it was a different race altogether. So it's kind of, it's so cool. Like, okay, this is getting into one of my points, so I'll save it for later. But it's awesome.
Yeah, so balanced storytelling where, you can have this world building to begin with it's very important, I think. But then, the ability to move on and transition from just being, the serialized series is, I think, important. And I think the mark of most good sci-fi shows.
Yeah.
And talking about balanced storytelling and things being in balance, I did want to bring up my gaming corner this week, because if any of you saw my post, you know that I'm going to talk a little bit about downloadable content, or DLCs. Now, there are pros and there are cons to DLCs. There are some big cons to DLCs and microtransactions specifically that I'm not going to touch right now, as it relates to vulnerable people like kids, those with gambling addictions, those who have impulse control issues. If any of you are interested, there's a user on YouTube called Jimquisition, and he has done several fantastic episodes on his YouTube channel explaining like how the gaming industry can be predatory towards vulnerable people, and how microtransactions are used to prey on gamers. But talking about gamers who don't have gambling problems, who don't have impulse control issues, who are not children, and just speaking about, like, say, somebody like me, DLCs can have some pros to them, and it really, I think, depends on the situation. To me, what makes a good DLC, number one, the game itself has to be complete as it is, and without the DLCs, it has to be a full game that I can have a fun experience with, even without the DLC. And for two, the DLC has to add something to the game that adds enough entertainment that is proportionate to the value that I'm putting out in money. So, say the Hearthfire DLC for Skyrim, you add the ability to build 3 different houses in 3 different locations after fulfilling like little bitty missions here and there. And that, while kind of small and a little bit grindy, it was really enjoyable, and it was, to me, worth the $5 that I gave for it. The other 2 DLCs for Skyrim, Dragonborn and Dawnguard, were more expensive, but they added a complete quest line. They had, for each one, they had brand new armor and weapons, they had brand new locations. So again, the content and the quality and the entertainment that I got out of it was proportionate to the money that I put into it. And for me, a third point is that, and this is just for me personally, I think I want a DLC where once I play a game with the DLC, I want to think, how could I have ever played this without the DLC? Where even though the game is complete and I did have fun without the DLC, I still enjoy it so much with it that I wouldn't want to go back to not having it. And again, I think that kind of ties into the worth of it. Now, obviously, there are issues with that in the gaming world where companies are charging out the wazoo for bits and pieces of content that are not worth the value that gamers are being asked to pay for them. There are some games that are put out that are technically not really even complete, and you have to just buy DLC in order to make it complete. There are games out there that are more pay to win, where you have to buy things on top of the base value of the game in order to actually advance the game. And obviously, in those cases, you know, DLCs and microtransactions are not a good thing. But again, it all comes back to what I was talking about with balance, where, you know, put out a good quality game that is complete without it. And then if you want to have, you know, more content that you want to add to it, price it appropriately. You know, it's really not too much to ask, I don't think. But, you know, obviously for some companies that this is just a mind-blowing concept that they do not understand.
I don't know, man.
EA. Sorry. Had something caught in my throat.
Don't mean to point any fingers, just...
Yeah.
Well, of course, and I think it's funny that when you were talking about that earlier, I had said something about expansion packs, and I know that you were always able to play the games, but the expansion packs, sometimes the graphics weren't necessarily as good if you didn't have the expansion. And I don't know, I was, you know, in high school not being able to play any of the expansion packs because I couldn't convince my folks to buy the expansion pack for me. So I guess that I feel like if I were to play any of these games, Elizabeth, I'd be lost. I feel
lost.
You gotta do what I do, because I usually jump in games late in the game. So usually what I can do is, if it's a good game, they usually have a Game of the Year edition where they have all the DLC. Or they'll have a season pass where you can buy just like one chunk of change and you'll have everything. And that's what I usually do then. That's what I actually did for Dragon Age Inquisition and Origins. I just got the Game of the Year editions. And then when I got Fallout 4, I had initially just gotten the base game, and I waited, and the season pass went on sale for like $20. And so for $20, I snagged up like 6 different DLCs all at once.
Nice.
So, yeah.
You just gotta figure out the timing.
Yeah, it's all about timing to get the best deal.
Okay, so let's talk about alien invasions.
Yes!
Oh boy, alien invasions are great. That is like every season finale of Stargate. There's a pending alien invasion. It's great.
Do either of you guys remember this series back in the 90s called Alien Nation? That was supposed to be set in the near future of 1995.
The near future of 1995?
Where, forgive me, it has been a while, but basically, like, aliens had crash landed on Earth, and so they were integrating into Earth's society. And obviously, you know, issues arising from aliens. Kind of, but they weren't bad aliens. They were just
They were peaceful.
Normal.
They were just trying to
live their lives, and they crash landed on Earth, and yeah. But it's called Alien Nation, and I remember it because I remember the aliens had a really cool look about them, because they were kind of basically humanoid, but they were a little different still. Like,
were they cone heads?
No, not cone heads, but like they didn't have hair on their heads, and then their heads had like these veiny things on them. So like you could tell like they were obviously not human, but they still had a general humanoid appearance.
Yeah.
So, but I do remember that. So I remember when I was thinking of like aliens and, you know, how sci-fi dealt with them, I'm like, you know, there's lots of different ways that they deal with aliens. Like, because sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're just, aliens trying to live their lives.
Yeah, exactly.
And humans.
Sometimes they're... Right. It's... Like I said, it's basically every season finale of Stargate was a pending alien invasion. And how are they going to prevent this invasion from happening? Or how are they going to stop them from destroying the Earth?
Mm-hmm.
And there's recurring episode titles. I forget the one that they used for, like, this is the alien invasion episode. But they always used that title. It was one word.
So you knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you could tell when it was the alien invasion episode because they always named it.
Well, see, and so I don't know if you guys were able to watch the X-Files or not, but that was kind of my thing growing up. That aired from like 93 to 2002.
I always thought I was going to have nightmares from watching it, so I never did.
Yeah, there were a few scary episodes, but it always touched on like alien invasion and other interesting technology, et cetera, that was being investigated. And the cool part is, like, Mulder, David Duchovny's character, was like the believer, like he believed everything, and then Scully, she didn't. She was like the skeptic. So it was cool because you could kind of like see both ends of things, and it was like paranormal, supernatural stuff going on. I watched this ridiculous show on BuzzFeed YouTube that has these two guys that are exactly that kind of pairing. One of them like believes in all paranormal, supernatural stuff, and one of them's like, show me a ghost. And they're just a good combination of the two things. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at was I'm going back to character development and falling in love with a character, or being able to relate to a character, relate to the drama that's going on in a science fiction. If it's doesn't have anything, if the characters don't have some kind of dramatic thing happening to them that you can relate to, it's also going to be hard to continue to watch the show. Right? No? Maybe?
Yeah.
Perhaps?
No, I would agree.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So what else do they have to have?
Now this one I think is a little bit more directly related to the sci-fi element and not just like shows and stuff in general, but they need, I think, a unique spin because there is so many sci-fi shows and movies and media out there that there needs to be something that sets it apart in order for it to like stick out. So like Firefly is like Western space,
Mm-hmm.
and Star Trek, they have their own thing with the Federation and, the non-interference for the most part.
The Prime Directive.
Yeah, the Prime Directive.
For the most part, yeah.
His little asterisk there.
They can reason out how they still kind of follow the Prime Directive.
Yeah, and then, obviously Stargate has the Stargates.
Yep.
It's the name Stargate.
The name Stargate,
yep. So, like all of these, shows that we really like watch and love, like they have something that is a little different that they bring to the table that other shows don't really necessarily have, or that they handle it in a way that other shows don't. And I think that's really important, obviously, to kind of withstand the test of time, because otherwise, it just gets lost in the shuffle.
Well, and that's kind of like the point of the science fiction thing, too, is like a technology that's significantly different than what we have today, or a futuristic setting, or space, or
other races of beings and aliens and that sort of thing. Like, bringing some kind of diversity to everyday life.
Right, like alternate timelines, or I think what always really draws me in is when there is a thing that the human race did that they really shouldn't have done.
You done messed up now.
Yeah, right. You done messed up. Like the Reavers, the Cylons. It's on the tip of my tongue that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it.
Terminator?
Yes. Oh my gosh. When the technology becomes self-aware, like,
Yep.
Oh, and then
done messed up. And those are always my favorite. That kind of thing where the human race just went too far, played God, just did what they shouldn't have done.
Exactly. Like, you should have probably left that alone. Even in some dumb Star Trek episode where they're like, oh, let's just gallivant into this wilderness on some alien planet that we know nothing about and touch everything.
I know, right? Nothing could possibly go wrong.
No, nobody could possibly contract a weird disease by doing that, or awaken some kind of creature who's been in hibernation.
That's what I love about Next Generation, because Q is so quick to just come out and just put them right on their butt and be like, no, you are messing up.
Exactly. Oh man. And that's another cool thing about Star Trek too, is like each series of Star Trek has a cool, quirky, like recurring thing that happens throughout. Like Q is in TNG, and DS9 has the whole conflict with the Cardassians and
the Ferengi.
No, not the Ferengi.
I don't watch DS9, so it was a pure guess.
No, Ferengi are in there though quite frequently, more frequently than in others, I think.
I remember in the other there was a recurring character called Mudd, Mudd. He was just like this rascally character that, like, every time he showed up, they would just like roll their eyes, like, oh, this guy again.
It's Mudd.
Yeah.
Oh, Bajorans, the Cardassians and the Bajorans. Yeah. Sorry, Bobo, don't kick me for forgetting.
we can edit out the brain farts.
Yes, that would be good. But yeah, I really enjoy the different series of Star Trek, how they have their unique little quirks about them, and that makes them, each series makes them interesting.
You know what always irritated me though about the original Star Trek? My dad would watch the movies and they were all out of order, playing on TNT or TNC or whatever
that was annoying.
Channel he was watching them on. And I never understood, like, what in the world was going on, because we'd watch the show or I'd watch The Next Generation and I'd be like, this is just insanity. Like, they know better to do that. Or, when did this happen based off of the other stuff that's going on? Like, I could never really grasp, like, what in the world was going on with the whales.
Out of order and
why.
Confused.
Yeah, I was so lost whenever he'd turn one of those on. And my dad was hilarious. He would get the television remote, flip through the channels until he saw something he liked, even if we had seen Beetlejuice or that Star Wars movie or that Star Trek movie or Crocodile Dundee, or he really liked Quigley Down Under. I swear.
Oh, that's a good one.
We watched everything over and over and over again because it was his television, like it was his turn to watch the TV.
So it's kind of like,
oh, Dad, we watched this last week, but man, we were still watching it today too.
So kind of like me in Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah,
there you go.
If it's on, I'm going to watch it.
I know several people who are like that. Yeah, there's usually something that I missed the first time I watched it that I can see the second time too.
Yeah. Yeah, but another thing that I find, like, really, it goes along with balanced storytelling and good characters. To make a sci-fi truly, really, really good is the depth of the world itself. And for me, I think it actually works best when it's, like, embedded into the present, so it kind of is plausible that it happens concurrent with everyday life right now. That's how Stargate was set up, is that it was present day. It was like, 1999, 2000 or whatever. Or no, it came out earlier than that. But so it was like present day when it came out, happening concurrently with current events, but it was all swept under the rug. Nobody could talk about it. And, they dedicated specific episodes to, like, covering up the Stargate program by making a TV show out of the Stargate program. I'm like, I love this so much. It could totally work. Or it's like set far in the future where we can plausibly believe that the technology has been created, like in Star Trek or something to that effect. The technology has advanced far enough where we have like hyperdrives and replicator machines to make instant food out of raw materials and that sort of thing. It's like, okay, I can given this vague expanse of time between now and when this is set, I could see us advancing this far as technology goes, and possibly having this sort of technology. And then also, like, not just the plausibility of it, but then the depth of the world building itself and how it relates to the present day, or how it relates to what they're adding to the present day, and making the storyline behind that really, really cohesive.
I think what's always most interesting to me is, like, you can get into those funks where you are watching a show or a movie or whatever, and there are questions unanswered, like, how do they go to the bathroom? Or how do they...
like the 3 seashells.
Yeah. So, like, when they don't answer those questions at all, it can be really prying that you don't know, so you don't believe it as much. And I feel like when they do intersperse those into a storyline or into a concept, it's much more interesting because there's no holes in the story.
Mm-hmm.
There's
like,
no...
The more of everyday life that's shown, the more plausible it is.
Exactly. No, I totally believe that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep. It makes me appreciate that scene in Firefly where Malcolm Reynolds, they showed him finishing up using the bathroom. I'm like, oh, well, that's how it works on the Firefly ship. Okay.
Okay, so I do want to mention that P is for phosphorus.
Yes, I was right.
You're doing so good.
Yay! Well, all those years of learning chemicals and even those 2 years I taught chemistry, it paid off. I remember my chemicals.
Yeah, the chemist brain has taken over, which is probably a good thing.
I'm okay with that.
And then I'm going to jump into Geek on Flake real quick. It occurred to me that my favorite Renaissance fair has recently opened. Their first opening week was, I think last weekend. And it's funny because it gets later and later every year, because they probably have to do training and make sure that the grounds are all good to go. But this is a long way of saying I am excited to go, as usual. But the one near me always has, like, themed weekends. And the first few times I've gone, I obviously haven't dressed up. I've gone in costume and not in costume, in a black tank top and black shorts, and I've gone in patchwork pants, and I've also dressed up as a gypsy before. So, but I wanted to talk specifically about steampunk and steampunk fashion. Because I thought it'd be really interesting because we're talking about science fiction and how steampunk is like a subgenre of science fiction and science fantasy. Because it incorporates technology and designs that are inspired like by 19th century steam powered machinery. So it really like romanticizes the idea of old, for lack of a better way of saying, old-timey fashion, but with a technologically advanced twist. So obviously steam and steam-powered industrial revolution is where it's centered around. But I always thought it was funny at Renaissance fairs when you go and steampunk always seemed to be like Victorian-esque or even medieval-esque dress with some kind of gears. Like before I got into knowing anything at all, I figured it was just, put some goggles on a top hat and you're good to go. But I promise you that's not it. It actually, when I was looking into things about the fashion, particularly, this is actually like something that I've been interested in for a long time. Like even when I was in high school, when all my friends were getting into goth stuff, I was more into like the other stuff. Like I wore the gypsy skirts and I had really fun embroidery, medieval-esque. I have a picture of myself at a homecoming dance, and I have no idea where I got the dress. I have no idea what I thought I was doing. But it was a very historical looking dress, or for lack of a better way of saying it.
An interesting way to put it.
But in steampunk fashion, corsets are more of a clothing item than an undergarment. So they're worn outside of the dress. And that's something you can find at the Renaissance fairs a lot of times too. And it's based mostly off of like the Victorian era. But I wanted to talk about like popular culture and like the idea of like steampunk couture and post-apocalyptic and tribal influences. And I'm excited because there's all these other things. I don't know if you guys have heard of like Lolita fashion, where it sort of romanticizes
the little girl,
like the joy of the little girl. Fashion.
Because when I was younger, I totally had a goth Lolita dress.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And so a lot of times, like the hats are going to be like the top hat, but a lot of times you'll also see like flight helmets and bowler hats. And what I think is really interesting about this particular fair is that they've got different themes for each weekend, but you could technically wear your steampunk stuff all the time, as well as like be a pirate anytime you wanted to be, or dress. They have a goth weekend, they have a cosplay weekend. And it's funny because all of these things have a different concept behind them, but they all are still an opportunity for people to dress up and be among their people. So I thought it was interesting anyway, just to look into things like the Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle influence, and H.G. Wells influence with like time traveling. And the cool part about the steampunk weekend, and even like going to TeslaCon and stuff, is there's always like a extra plot line for the event or for the weekend as well. So they even got a place where you can see the extra storyline, the extra story that's going on behind the scenes. And it's going to be obviously cool. Steampunk derived, so that they've got some extra thing going on that weekend, in addition to all of the normal Queen and Tea with the Queen and all of that stuff that goes on. So, that's really all I wanted to talk about with Geek on Fleek.
It's cool though. Hey, I'm excited for you. I kind of wish I had. Well, I'm sure there is a Renaissance fair around here, but I don't know if it lasts as long as that one around you, because I've been to that
get
one
there
before,
eventually.
And that was really cool. We'll figure it out.
Well, there's sci-fi cosplayers. There's like steampunk design fashion that's specifically even like haute couture, like the Christian Dior stuff. So I always think it's really cool to see what's going on now, especially since it's almost kind of modernized, where there's more of it lately. You can see more gears and industrial ideas in science fiction, as well as in television and movies that we see, where the post-apocalyptic concept is changed a little bit differently, and they sort of do have to go back to a steam technology, or it's almost, I felt like it really melded into our talk today, because it's a whole other science fiction concept that not very many people know about, but we all know about it too. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that it's like you hear about it, you might not exactly know what it is, but it sounds cool. I'm
all about like things that sound cool, and you're not too sure that you want to get interested. Just get interested and get into it. Life's too short to not read up on things that look cool.
That's right. That's the truth.
To be fair, I definitely need to read up on it too. Like I look into these things and I go, oh man, when am I going to find the time to actually be knowledgeable about this? So I definitely don't want to say that I'm knowledgeable about anything whatsoever, because I'm not.
But you do have those rabbit hole moments where you just...
Right. And then I can, be reading something for forever and forget that I'm actually supposed to be at work. So that's it for Geek on Fleek.
All right. Well, thanks for getting nerdy with us today here at Beauties and Headcanons. We would love to hear what your favorite sci-fi is, or what you think makes a good sci-fi. So hit us up on our social media and let us know. And that's all we've got. So I'm Emily.
I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Lindsay. And thanks for getting nerdy with us today on Beauties and Headcanons.